Hello from Sub-Zero New York City, and welcome to Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I have conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those with some connection to Latin America. This episode is brought to you by latamlist.com. If you like this podcast, you'll enjoy Latamlist's daily tech news reporting. I'm also going to plug my new book, Crossing Borders, a venture capitalist guide to doing business in Latin America. I took my experience living and working in LATAM for the past 8 years and paired it with excerpts from the Crossing Borders podcast, with more than 30 entrepreneurs that have been on this podcast featured in the book. You can buy it on Amazon today. My guest today is Eugenio Perea, a Mexican entrepreneur turned mentor turned company builder who is now a Magma Partners venture partner in Mexico City, in addition to his work with startups. After trying chemical engineering and marketing degrees, Eugenio started his career at Nielsen before joining the startup world with his own business. Then, with the help of venture capitalists in Mexico, he became the CEO of a tech company and then started a company builder. We talk about what he learned during his career, how the Mexican entrepreneurial ecosystem has changed, and how entrepreneurship can make Mexico a better place. We also cover why U.S. investors should be looking at Mexico, strengths and weaknesses in the ecosystem, along with Eugenio's hope for Mexico's future. It was a pleasure to share Eugenio's story, and I'm looking forward to working more closely with him to find and support amazing Mexican entrepreneurs. Hey, Eugenio, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being willing to do it.
No, thank you. I'm really excited about being here.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So where are you in the world today?
Right now, I'm sitting at home in Mexico City, and I am halfway. I'm in my pajamas because I kicked everyone out to take this call. So I usually am at this time. I'm at the gym, but I kicked everyone out and stayed home for the call.
Oh, so I'm making you be more out of shape. It's
No.
I'm sorry about that.
No, I'll take this as my rest day and make up for it tomorrow.
So what are you working on these days?
Well, I'm very happy to have been invited to Magma Partners as a venture partner in Mexico City. And I'm really happy about that because it's like a continuation of the trip I've been on for the past 6 or 7 years, which is all this entrepreneurship process in Mexico. And I think this is a great way to move up in the world in that sense. On the side, I'm helping companies in fintech and health stuff to navigate the intricacies of lean startup ideas and that sort of thing. And I run the Founder Institute in Mexico, which is a school for entrepreneurs.
And how did you get into entrepreneurship? Was it something you knew that you always wanted to do, or something that just came up in your career?
No, I didn't even know this actually existed. My path was going to be very, very different. I thought I would study chemical engineering, and then I would do an MBA, and then I would work at Procter & Gamble or McKinsey or something like that. And then I would be like a proper organized little soldier in the corporate world. And that didn't turn out like that at all. I got lost in the process and became this startup person in Mexico, which is really, really weird for me because my Eugene back 20 years back was very different from what I'm thinking right now.
So let's go 20 years back. What were you doing?
20 years back, I was.
So you graduate with chemical engineering?
No, I didn't at all. I went into chemical engineering because that's what I wanted, and I was. My father was a chemical engineer, and he always drilled into me that chemical engineers are the best engineers at all because they have this huge array of opportunities and ways of thinking, and it's like the best engineering degree you can have. So I went into that, and the girl I was running after at the time was also going into that. So I went headlong into chemical engineering, and after about 2 years, I thought this is horrible. I hate this. So I looked at the things I needed to study after the next years, and it was like chemical reactions and thermodynamics and reactor design and physical equilibrium and chemical equilibrium, and it looked horrible. And then I saw one thing that I need to do was called in Spanish it was Taller de Resolución de Problemas. So problem resolution workshop. And I thought that's exactly what I need, and that will decide if I stay in this career or not. Because in Mexico, you choose your career, and that's not like major or minor like in the US. You choose your career, and that's it. So I went back the next semester, and I sat down in the class, and the doctor comes in, and he writes on the blackboard, "Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. So-and-so, and this is the workshop for resolution of problems of thermodynamics." I was like, geez. So I said, no, you know what? Let's just run away. So I went to another school very far away from my house, and I went into marketing. And just from the get-go, it was very disappointing because I was told I did very well in the entrance exam, but they told me two things. Well, you need to take remedial English and remedial math. And I went like, no, there must be some kind of mistake because no, my family is from England. I don't no. And I just had advanced calculus and I did very well over there in engineering. I don't need remedial math for marketing. But they did. So I lost half a semester doing that. And I was really annoyed at having been like played. And I didn't really enjoy my classes because I was older than everybody else. And it was very far away and I was working already and I really hated it. So after a couple of years, I just said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. And I left. So I never graduated either from chemical engineering or marketing. And I went to work directly and I joined a very big company called Nielsen. Nielsen's they're in 100 countries and they do market research. So I was working for the division that tends to retailers, Walmart and big companies. And I was going to be one of the rising stars in the company. My entrance exam was very, very good. And you have 3 months training and then you have an exam to see if you stay. And mine was very, very good. I was like a third highest in the history of the company. But that turned into what brought me here today, which is I am not a good fit for a big company. I was too full of myself. I did not respect the hierarchy. I did not respect the forms and the way things need to happen within a big company. And I was like a loose cannon within the organization. And in 2 years, I became a problem for them and they became a problem for me. So we started hating each other. And by the third year, we really needed to part ways. So I got an offer and I left. And that was the first signal that I wasn't on the right path. So that was fun to be in a corporate world and learn all the ropes about how things work, but I wasn't good at it at all. I was too rebellious for it.
That's funny. I only lasted about, I think, a half a semester in the entrance to the business school before I was like, no, I'm not doing this, and ended up in political science because they tried to have us do in like week 6 of the accounting 100 class how to account for an issue of Walmart bonds. And I was already running a small business at the time, and they were like, I asked the professor, like, why do we need to know how to account for Walmart bonds? If I ever have a business that's successful, I'm going to have like the best accountants in the world doing this. He didn't have a good answer, and that sort of killed it for me.
I think there's a mindset that you find in the startup world where you question everything around you for the benefit of the entire ecosystem, and that is not something universities or corporate world really accepts very well. So I was kidnapped by the guy who ran pricing for Walmart Mexico, a very, 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 very smart guy. And he joined the startup with his brother and the big company in Mexico. It was funded by Televisa in Mexico. And it was called Ticket Access, and it was going to be the Ticketmaster killer in Mexico. So they had me over with them because they wanted someone who could speak the technical language side of things and the business side of things. So I was like the liaison between business and technical. And it was a great job. I really enjoyed it. It paid me a ton. It was fantastic. But the very week I moved to this company, there was a movement in the stock market. And 2 very big billionaires in Mexico had sort of swapped stock for another company. And suddenly my company was a monopoly. It was part of a monopoly. So the government came knocking and said, what part of monopoly did you not understand with these? You have this holding company and this holding company. They do the same things and they are just joined forces. They all have ticket companies, which is Ticketmaster, Ticket Access. So this, you can't have this. You have to either sell one of the stacks or close it down. So they tried selling us. We were like 12 people, and they were like $50 million back in 2002, I think. And nobody was buying. So Ticketmaster took over our technology, and we were laid off, all of us. And the technology back then in 2002, we already had in place. You could print out your tickets at home with an encrypted barcode at home for plane tickets or theater tickets or whatever. And it was fantastic. It took Ticketmaster 6 years to use our technology to integrate that into their own offerings.
So that was almost like a startup from a big company or a very, very wealthy individual.
The guy who designed the entire thing was my boss's brother, and he was brilliant, and he got funding from a huge company to run that, and they got bought out. But I wasn't at the level to be bought out with them. But yeah, it was a startup. It was only 12 people, and we lived. The money came from Televisa, and we lived inside Televisa, which is like the largest TV company in Latin America, and it was my first taste of venture capital and entrepreneurship and the way of doing things very quickly without regard for, move fast and break things. And it broke. And I was left. I saw things coming, and I was going to get married at that time. So the company died while I was on my honeymoon. So I came back to Mexico. I was in Costa Rica, which is a gloriously beautiful country. I drove for 1,000 miles all over Costa Rica, which is brilliant. I came back and I called my boss and said, there's no office anymore. So just go and get your check. So I got a very nice fat check for my efforts, and I was let loose on the world. And I started looking around for something to do, and I came upon an ad on the internet to do mystery shopping for the Ripley's Museum in Mexico City. So they would pay me $50 for 30 minutes of work. I would have to go to a museum and act like I was a normal visitor and do a report on the visit and, cleanliness and service and stuff. So I did that for 2 months. And I thought, well, if they're paying me $50 for this, how much are they charging the museum? So one of those things that how hard could it be moments that always starts off a trip. I set up a company, my first company. And that was my first foray into my own entrepreneurship. So I set up a mystery shopping company, which I didn't even know existed at the time. And I just did that. And I did it for 2 years. And by year 2, I had national coverage, and I was doing restaurants and drugstores and bowling alleys and supermarkets and all sorts of weird things all over the country. And it was horrible. It was really, really, really horrible. The margins were razor thin, Amazon thin. And I was alone, and I got into this horrible mental cycle that I called like mental incest, because you have no one to bounce ideas off of. So if your idea, the last idea is horrible or brilliant, because you have no one to say, oh, come on, that's stupid, or oh, that's brilliant. So it was really depressing, and it was really cold, and I was sitting in my flat, freezing in the West Mexico City, and it was really difficult. So I did that for 2 years, and then a friend of mine called me and said, "Look, I need some help for a project with the financial side of Toyota. They need process redesign." And I said, "Yeah, well, how much is it pay?" And it paid like 10 times what I was making. I said, "Oh, let's do that right now." So I closed down my company, and we launched that other company, and we became, over the next 6 months, we became a huge little company in terms of process redesign in Mexico. So thanks to Toyota and a couple of banks, we became like the leading company that did process redesign in the country very quickly. And that turned into software design and software building for these companies. So we would go in and redesign the processes, and then we would make the software to run the process, and then we would get the people to run the process. So we went from my friend and I to 50 people in a year, and then we started growing like crazy. And that was from 2004 or 5 until about 2000, maybe 11.
So that's one of the dreams of most startup founders is, hey, I want to grow really fast. What was it like growing that fast, and what were some of the things you learned from that growth?
It was horrible. It was horrible because you need to do everything yourself, and then you start hiring people willy-nilly. And my first real moment of fear came midway through the first year. We had our first Christmas dinner, well, lunch actually, and I had hired everyone on the company, and there were like 22 of us by then. So I looked down the table, our first Christmas lunch. We were feeling very proud of ourselves. We were making lots of money, and we were very happy. And I looked down the table, and I noticed that more than 50% of our hires were left-handed, and I'm left-handed. And I had been the one to, find them and convince them and hire them and all the interviews. I'd done everything, and I felt the chill down my spine because I realized I was really doing it incorrectly because I was just pattern matching the kind of people I like, which is myself. And I was really scared I was doing it wrong because I realized that there's no way that 50% of left-handers is normal. We're more like 6 to 10% of the population. So I ran out to find someone to do HR for us properly. So we started growing very quickly, and we began to lose culture. We began to lose control. We began to lose a lot of things. And we were hiring very young people. So there was lots of drinking in the office on Fridays. And it was very hard to build a culture where you are very loose and friends on the inside and very strict and formal on the outside, because we work with banks and stock brokerages and people who expect a 3-piece suit and a coat and tie and that sort of thing. So it was very difficult to manage that correctly because you're friends with people inside the office and you have to be very strict with them outside the office. So that was a learning curve. And I think we sort of did it well, but strategically we lost control of the direction of the company by the third or fourth year because we felt very confident in our abilities to do anything. And at some point, everyone started to focus on the software side of things, and I was getting really concerned that we could defend that position because there are a million companies that do software in the world, and we have big companies, and we had Tata from India coming into Mexico directly for our market, and I was really worried about that. And it's a lot more fun to do software than to do process redesign. Process is boring. Process is detail oriented and it's difficult, and you have to work with people. It's really physically, mentally, emotionally difficult, and it's boring. So nobody wanted to do that, and they wanted to do something because it was exciting, and we had new languages. You had .NET coming along, and Java was coming up in the world. It was fantastic, and nobody wanted to do process. But process, we were number one, and in software we were number whatever, 100 or 500. So by then, entrepreneurship and VC was on the radar in Mexico. I started reading about all these things, and Silicon Valley was starting to become a thing in the press in Mexico, which in my life didn't exist up until that time. And I started to feel a lot more constrained about my role in the company. I was CEO, and I didn't like it at all. And I thought, well, maybe it's time for a change again. So I told my partners, you know what? Maybe I want to go out to seek my fortune again, join the circus. So I'll sell you my shares, and I'll go out into the world again. And they said, yeah, okay, because they wanted to do software, and I thought that was a bad idea. Focus on software, not more than process. So I did that. I sold my shares and stepped out into the sun again. That was weird. I was not young.
And what would you say? You mentioned culture and focus. So looking back and when talking to other startups, what would you say you learned, or what advice would you give them to maybe not make the same mistakes that you made with culture and focus back then?
I think if I would do that again, I would work back from where I wanted the company to be and try to build that consciously, because we didn't really build anything consciously. We were just responding against opportunities and threats. And if I could have gone back to look, this is the kind of people we want to have, and this is the kind of culture we want to have, and build that from scratch. Because you can be very formal, or you can be very loose, or very remote work oriented, but you have to choose a path. I read somewhere that the CEO of, I think it was Coleman, and he said that you have to have a game face on all the time, because your employees need to feel consistency. So if you're going to be a hard ass, be a hard ass every day. If you're going to be friends with everyone and go drinking with them, do that every day. don't change depending on the circumstances. And we would change depending on how pressured we were by a company or by a client or by an opportunity. And I think we really screwed up doing that, because we try to be friends and then we try to be businessmen, and it didn't work. You have to choose one side of the aisle or the other.
So you decide to leave and go back into the world. How did you decide what to do next?
I I bumped into a guy Federico Antoni, and we were standing barefoot by a pool watching our kids do a swimming presentation. And we got to talk, about ideas, and we just met, and we talked about ideas about businesses and news and whatever. And he was intrigued by my torrent of ideas, and he invited me over to the office, and we started talking about ideas. So he invited me to be a sort of entrepreneur in residence at a VC fund. This must have been 2012. And they told me, we need your ideas, and we have the infrastructure and the entrepreneurs to build your ideas out. So that was my first step into the startup VC world. And it was a learning experience every single day. I had no idea about anything. my first meeting with an entrepreneur, I showed up in a 3-piece pinstripe suit. I nearly got laughed out of the office. I was thinking like a banker still, because I spent so much time with the banks. I lived inside a bank for 7 years, so I would like a proper little banker. It was strange, and learning about VC and learning about lean startup, and learning about all these things and all the names and all the figureheads of the industry, and it was like being back at school. But it was something I was really excited about. So Federico and Fernando really showed me the ropes around the world. They introduced me to tons of people, and I was just picking everyone's brains all day long and trying to build a company. And I was really bad at it at the beginning.
Why were you bad at it?
Because I had no idea what I was doing. I was so accustomed to the old ways of doing businesses where you research so much, and I tried to bring all my Nielsen acumen into things, and spend ages looking into things and designing processes and designing a business and business plans. And I didn't know you had to go out into the world and test things and do iterations very quickly. I didn't know that. So I needed to learn that, and Federico was kind enough to beat that into my head very quickly in his most his inimitable style.
What was the inflection point where you really started to get it and said, "Okay, I'm taking off my 3-piece suit, and now I'm actually into the world of entrepreneurship, and I understand this. I've got my sea legs on this."
I think the inflection point was a talk I gave. I was invited by 500 startups to give a talk about a company I was running at the time. And to write the talk, I really had to dig deep into myself and see what am I going to talk about? Because I've always been competent at speaking in public, but this was a new audience. So I really worked at that. It was a 7-minute talk, and I really wanted to do well. So that was when I realized things had changed completely around me and within me by thinking for myself. And it was a good talk, and I was very successful at it. And that was when I realized things had changed. And that company was called Pago Fácil. And that was also Federico's doing. He introduced me to the company, and they offered me equity and the CEO role. And the company was funny because it was the first company in Mexico that did like a square clone, a magnetic stripe reader for mobile phones. And when I got the job, we had to raise money again because the company had sort of died over the past few months. And I had to do everything from scratch. And I had to raise money, and I had to redesign the company and hire people. And so everything I had done up to then in other companies, I had to do again, but for my own company this time. And we raised $1 million in 6 weeks, which I thought was normal. Now I know it's not. And we did very well for the first 2 years, and it was an incredible trip. So that company taught me a lot about skin in the game, and a lot about iterations, and a lot about how the only thing that matters is your market's opinion. My opinion is irrelevant. Yours is irrelevant. Your mentor's opinion is irrelevant. Your CEO, your president of the board, everyone's opinion is irrelevant. Your market is the only opinion that counts.
What other things did you learn in that business?
All those things you read in Inc. magazine and TechCrunch, things like hire slowly, fire fast. When you know them because you read them all the time. When you have to actually do them, they really sink into you. So I didn't fire fast enough, so I had to learn how to do that. Culture beats strategy every time. You have to build that into the company. Delegating correctly. Delegating was a huge problem for me. I don't know how to delegate. I'm not brilliant at it, but you had to do it. We grew like 12% a week for 2 years, so there was no way we could not delegate and grow that quickly. And we had to navigate regulations and everything about startups. We had to compact everything into weeks, not months. Handling a board, my God, handling a board is a nightmare. Ever since then, I've tried to be a very useful board member because I really struggled with my board that time.
What were some of the characteristics that either you really liked in a board member that you're trying to emulate when you're on boards, or things that you really disliked that you make sure never to do to an entrepreneur?
I would never approach a board meeting without having first read the deck. I wouldn't dare walk into a meeting without having first done my homework. I think that is the horrible thing to do. And I think people like to listen to themselves speak. And sometimes it's better to just shut up and listen for a while and only speak when you're about to do something useful, not just have your say for whatever reason. And really question strategy and really help strategy, not just focus on laying into the CEO and just trying to berate him for not moving the numbers. So I think a board should be strategic, and I try to do that when I can.
Yeah, I think the ideal board meeting for me is when everybody has read all of the information that the CEO and team has provided ahead of time, and that the team has done a good job preparing all of the information, so that the board meeting is not just a presentation of what happened. It's okay, we all are on the same page. Let's actually make some decisions and have conversations here.
Exactly, and really giving the team the space to deliver bad news without chewing their heads off, because this is a very volatile environment and bad things will happen eventually. So not having the CEO walk into the meeting fearing for his life with bad news is I think it's a good practice.
Yeah, and the last thing you want is a CEO hiding bad news because they don't want to get yelled at. You really want to have a good environment for people to be able to feel like they can say anything and share the reality of the company, because that really is the last thing you want, is to have surprises.
Exactly. You need to have bad news up front and with enough time to do something about it. And you know that thing where people talk about Jeff Bezos having everyone sit down and read a 6-page memo at each meeting? I think that's brilliant, because if you really sit everyone down, we all read the same document at the same time in silence, then I think that really kicks off meetings very well, because people are, I don't know, in Mexico still, I think that investors sometimes and people and mentors and board members feel that their presence is enough, and they have to put in the work. So I respect senior people who put in the work a lot, and I really despise wannabes who just think that by being there is enough.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. So you went in your career from traditional business to a fast growing company that you created, to learning about startups, to being the CEO, and then went back to the other side of the table again, as sort of an investor slash entrepreneur. Tell me about that experience.
Well, that was funny because I wanted to do something that was sort of like an incubator, an accelerator, because I have a lot of ideas. You know that document you have on your computer called ideas.txt? Well, mine is pages and pages long. And I wanted to do something to sort of have my ideas go out into the world without me doing them. So it was Federico again, and he invited me to teach a class at his he has this course he teaches at the university. And we were driving back in traffic in Mexico City, and I was telling him about this idea. And he started teasing me mercilessly. Oh, mentors and an incubator. Oh, that's very original. I'd never heard that before. No, shut up. So he goes, well, what do you want to do? What are you going to achieve? And I explained what I want to achieve. He said, no, that's called a company builder. Okay. So I went home and I Googled company builders. Oh, that's interesting. So I started sort of putting that together. And by then I had been invited to be a mentor at the Founder Institute. and that was very interesting. And then I was asked to become a co-director by a guy called Andres Bianchotto. He's a guy from Argentina, lived in Mexico, was brilliant, and then he wanted to go off with a previous co-director from FI to do a company, so he sort of gave me the job. So I thought, well, if I have this program in my hands, this could be like the step number one for this company builder. So I was trying to build a 3-level layer cake of FI plus maybe a crowdfunding stage and then accelerator stage to build companies in Mexico. Because I think that Mexico, the only way we can fix this country is by massive entrepreneurship all over the country. We are depending on who you ask and what metric you use, we are the 11th to 15th economy by GDP, but we are like the 57th to 67th by GDP per capita. And that gap will not be narrowed by 20th century industrialization. You need to do something else. And we need to have people really go back to pre-big company spirit of going out and doing stuff. So I've always wanted to do something, not always, ever since I've been on this 2011 to now trip about growth and companies. I think this is a way for the country to actually dig itself out of its current hole. So this was my idea to do that, and I had always been interested in the VC side of things, and I've always read about it a lot, and I have this huge list on Twitter about which I read every day about VCs and investors. So I've always thought that we have like 3 or 4 parts that we need to fix. Dave McClure has this fantastic slide from a very old talk. Says critical ecosystem factors, and one of all 6 factors I think we need to build up in Mexico. And I think we're doing fine from 2012 to now. I think we have put the pieces in place. Now we need to accelerate them.
So let's talk about the ecosystem. How has it changed from when you first got into it in 2011 to today? And what are some of the core pieces that you think still need to be strengthened?
The first really moment I thought, well, I'm part of this. I started going to events, tech start nights, and all the startup things I could find. And by the 7th event, people were saying hello to me because we were so few people in Mexico doing these things. So I was known by the 7th event. So it was really easy to become known in the ecosystem. But when the last president came on, he announced the creation of a National Entrepreneurial Institute. It's a federal decision. So I got invited to our local version of the White House. There was everyone there from the startup ecosystem, and I was there, and I felt like, wow, I've arrived. But I had arrived because there was nothing there. So 500 people over the past 6 years have built up government institutions and VC funds and accelerators and proper startups and proper entrepreneurs that really work well and not just focus on a medium-sized success and liaison with universities and payment systems and education and a sense of camaraderie. And the number one factor that Dave McClure says is necessary is the fact that you believe in the ecosystem. Silicon Valley exists because they believe it works, because it does, so it does. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that's one of the things we have worked at. We need to fix legislation. I think we're on the right path, but we have a long way to go. I think the fact that we have the Mexican Entrepreneur Association helps. We managed to pass 2 laws, which are very good. One is the fact you can open a company in 1 day at 0 cost. And the other is that you can close a company at 0 cost, which that was a huge success. And I think that helps. We need to fix the payment space. We need to fix identities in this country. Identity is a huge problem in this country. In the US, you have all these databases and they all interconnect and it works. And you know who people are, where a business lives and how they pay taxes. Here, risk is so high in financial institutions because there's no way to know who anyone is and where they live and how to find them if they run away with your money. I think that's a huge problem. I think we need to teach investors, especially angel investors, how to manage risk and how to invest in companies, how to not kill the companies they're investing in, because a lot of rich guys, guys and girls from big companies are getting into investing, and they want like, I want 51% of your company and I'll give you $100,000. So that's like guarantee startup killer. Right? We need to teach them how to do this. I think VCs should stop thinking like private equity investors and more like risk takers. Universities need to move faster. We need more Stanfords and not stodgy old universities like we have in Mexico. I think that's it.
That's it. Small list.
Yeah. Yes. Small. Well, if I'm going to devote my life to this, it has to be, a massive thing to try to achieve. I won't see this in my lifetime, but I think it's the only way to fix it. And I think it's a very good way to fix any country, not just Mexico, or Indonesia, or Brazil, or Argentina, or wherever. I mean, we need to change how we think of countries and how they grow. If you look at, who Max Roser is? Max Roser is a guy on Twitter. It's at Our World in Data. And if you look at his graphs and his numbers, we have never had it so good in our history. The growth we've had over the past 150 years is just unprecedented. And that is something we need to make sure everyone gets. There's enough money for everyone. There's enough food for everyone. There's enough opportunity for everyone. We just have to spread it out. And I think entrepreneurship is the way to go.
What are some of the best things that have changed for the better in the Mexico ecosystem over, say, the last 5 years?
Access to capital, inspiration. We have inspiration now. We didn't have inspiration. We just had faith, which I think is a very, very bad foundation for a movement. But now we have inspiration because we've had exits, and that is brilliant. We can see, for example, Corner Shop. We can look at every single stage of the company. We know who the guys are. We know what they did and how they evolved and how they grew and what they did and who invested and the exit. We can look at that piece by piece and try to emulate the good things about what they did. That is brilliant. So we have funds like ALLVP with their successes. We have Ignia. We have Valid. We can look at things and see how they can be replicated. We have a sense of brother sisterhood within the ecosystem. We can reach out to people and ask for help. We don't view a failure as the determining for the rest of your life. Failure is just a process. It's just a moment. I think that changed a lot. And I think in terms of general population, startups and entrepreneurs have become a thing. We didn't exist in the national consciousness 6 years ago, and now we do. Yeah, I think that is the biggest thing. We exist in the national consciousness now.
Yeah, I think the change that I've seen in different countries in the region, I mean, Chile was one that changed from 2010 to probably like 2013-ish, 13, 14, where you started to see a real change was when you said, oh, I have my own business or I'm an entrepreneur in 2010, they'd sort of look at you like, oh, poor guy, he doesn't have a job. And
yeah.
Now it's maybe even too far to the other side where, oh, everyone wants to do it and they treat people like rock stars, which is a term that I despise. Yeah. But I think that happened or is happening now in Colombia with some of the biggest successes. Maybe it changed a year to 2 years ago. Mexico seems to be right in the middle of that change, or it's changed again over the last 2-3 years. So I think it's one of those things that all of the countries in LATAM are going through, just at different rates, and it's something that is a huge game change, even though it's not a concrete change, but it's something that when you have the president of a country or the wealthiest people in the country talking about startups and their kids want to do startups, it's a real big difference.
Yeah, because little kids in primary school are not thinking only to become a lawyer, a doctor, or go into daddy's company, or a basketball player or football player. I think, maybe this is something I could do. It's just something that exists for everyone now. It's the fantasy is there. We are even mocked in the press. It's like when Kurt Cobain was noticed that Weird Al Yankovic had done a song of Nirvana, a tribute. It said, well, we're there. We are there now. If Weird Al Yankovic is covering us, then we have arrived. It's us now. Entrepreneurs are such a meme now in Mexico. We even get comedians mocking us, which is fantastic because that means that people know about us, and out of 1,000 people, maybe 2 will join us and help us to move the needle forward.
So why should, say, U.S. investors or Chinese investors or investors from Japan and Korea, why should they be looking at Mexico as a place to help the startup ecosystem or invest?
Because the risk versus reward balance has shifted toward reward. Risk has been dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping, and reward and the opportunities has been growing and growing and growing and growing. 10 years ago, investors in the US were very wary of investing in something that they couldn't get their hands on very quickly if things went south, which made sense. But all the risks involved have been going down for the past, I don't know, 20 something years. So now it's safe to invest in Mexico and Latin America. And the opportunity is massive. I once went to see a talk by a guy called Vivek Wadhwa. He's out of San Francisco, but I think he's Indian. And he was, I didn't really love him, but he said something that really struck me. He said, would you people please stop looking north? The US, why? You have 700 million people, you have 7 billion of GDP in Latin America. It's there for the taking. And I thought, you're right. Why should we try to, everyone wants to go to Silicon Valley and New York and Austin. No. We have all these countries and we sort of maybe speak the same language and maybe understand each other. There's all these people. There's so much good that can be done and money to be made helping people get what they want. I think I love startups when they bring things that were only for the elite for everyone. I know it's a cliche, but Uber, if you wanted to have a BMW with a driver, you need to pay for that. And now you can have one for $12. I think giving everyone good stuff and making money out of that, I think that's brilliant. And Latin America is a perfect place to do that. I think it's the place to do that right now.
That was so good that I sort of want to end it there, but I want to ask what blogs, podcasts, books, documentaries do you like to recommend to people, whether just about life or about entrepreneurship in general?
It's funny because this year will be my depth year. There's a guy called David Kane. He's a Canadian writer, and he wrote a year ago about having a depth year. A depth year means no more new books, no more new blogs, no more new papers. Don't add more stuff into your life. Just finish what you started. No hobbies, just focus on what you have. So I went into my various lists, and between books and papers and things I've downloaded and on my wish list, I have 3 years worth of reading to do. So I won't add a single book to my wish list. So the only blogs I read right now are Cal Newport's blog about minimalism, David Kane about living a proper life, and Farnham Street blog. I think Farnham Street blog is brilliant by Russell. What's his name? I forgot his name. Farnham Street blog.
We can put it in the show notes. Don't worry.
Okay. So Farnham Street blog, I think, is brilliant. David Kane is brilliant. Cal Newport is brilliant, and I think that is it. I've cut down as much as I can because there's so many ideas, and I'm going back to the classics. I'm reading old stuff. Oh, and Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss is my guilty pleasure.
Why do you think it's important to cut back on everything?
Because it's so easy to just get lost in the next Medium post or the next blog post or the next tweet or the next whatever. And you don't learn these things because there's no thought that went into creating them. Whereas a proper book that's been vetted through the ages as being really, really good, then that really, I did last January, I did a full detox from Twitter, from social media and from news. I didn't read a single piece of news and didn't go on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram for the entire month. You know what happened? Nothing happened. I didn't miss a single thing. If it was important enough, I would learn about it from people. So I could focus on actually doing stuff and reading proper things for more than 90 seconds. My kids are victims of that because this year I've convinced everyone that once a day we will sit down and read. And we are now up to 24 minutes. My kids hate it, but now we started a few weeks ago and we add a minute every day. And my goal is to have an hour a day where everyone just turns off screens and noises and phones, and we all read for an hour. I think that'll be the best thing I can give them in the future.
I think that's great advice just for a person, but also for if you're the CEO of a company, you got to detox from the daily minutia of your analytics and your stats and really be able to focus on the big picture to be able to succeed. So I think it's good advice, whether both for your offline life, but also for your business life. It's good to be able to get away. I think it's one of those reasons why people get really good work done on planes.
Exactly.
Before they had Wi-Fi.
Because you have your own information and you can work at it. Shane Parrish, the guy's name is Shane Parrish at Farnham Street. He's brilliant. That blog is brilliant. Because there's so much stuff, and it's like a dopamine hit every single second. There's nothing you can get from that, and it's so satisfying. All these little things, and you think they're important, and they're not important for your life. They're not important.
Well, I think that's a great place to stop here. We'll definitely need to do a round 2 later on in the year. Thanks for taking the time to do it, and here's to focusing on the important things.
Exactly. No, thank you very much. I'm really excited about this coming year. I'm really excited about it. I think I don't know if it's true that the Chinese have this thing where I hope you live for interesting times, which is a curse apparently. But I think we are moving into very interesting times everywhere around the world. I think we have the best opportunity right now to really do things right.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to check out latamlist.com if you want daily LATAM tech news, and check out my new book, Crossing Borders, on Amazon. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends. It's the best way for people to learn about Latin America tech. Thanks to Angel and Sofia for helping produce this podcast, and thank you for listening. Have a great rest of your day.